I hope as you sang, especially the last two songs, you were thinking about what we were singing. You know, in many ways, our world has been reduced to sound bites, 140 characters on Twitter, and cheap shots at people we don't even know online. Social media has unleashed the worst in some people by allowing them to cloak their ugliness with anonymity. And this has had such a divisive effect on much of the country, if not the world. Christians are not immune to these things. We'd be foolish to think so. Indeed, doctrinal division has led in some instances to fellowship being reduced to exchanging meeting flyers and love becoming a word we say with little or anything going beyond our lips. The Apostle Peter wrote in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 22, "Since you have purified your souls in obeying the truth through the Spirit in sincere love of the brethren, love one another with a pure heart, fervently." Sincere love. Unfeigned love, King James. Unhypocritical love, the meaning of the term. Real love. Love is active in people's lives. And fellowship is what binds people together through that love. And these basic principles can be so easy to forget amongst the wealth and the luxury of 21st century America, but they are essential characteristics of Christianity each and every day. For most of the summer of 2017, statues, racism, and riots dominated the news. But the arrival of Hurricane Harvey on the Gulf Coast changed that, at least temporarily. Statues were replaced with sacrifice. Hate was replaced with heroism. Violence was replaced with valor. I only wish this change were permanent. Unfortunately, I remember how quickly the unity that followed the events of September 11th, 2001 gave way to divisive political opportunism. But regardless of what happens in the world around us, real fellowship and real love demand real action that stems from the hearts of committed Christians, and not just for the moment. In the first century, when people were confronted with a crisis, Christians rose up to help one another. And in doing so, they showed the way to real love and real fellowship. In Acts chapter 11, verses 27 through 30, we read of this account that was happening in the life of the early church. Here Luke records, "And in these days prophets came from Jerusalem to Antioch. Then one of them, named Agabus, stood up and showed by the Spirit that there was going to be a great famine throughout all the world, which also happened in the days of Claudius Caesar. Then the disciples, each according to his ability, determined to send relief to the brethren dwelling in Judea. This they also did, and sent it to the elders by the hands of Barnabas and Saul." I can think of no passage that so fit our current circumstance as this. And as we consider what this passage is saying, we need to understand it in principle, not just in the moment. The first thing I want you to note is found in verses 27 and 28 then. Real love and real fellowship beget real empathy. Notice what he says. In these days, prophets came from Jerusalem to Antioch. There was interest already. Then one of them, named Agabus, stood up and showed by the Spirit that there was going to be a great famine throughout all the world, which also happened in the days of Claudius Caesar. Now, why did he bring that up? It was because it was significant and it was a concern. It was going to really matter and change people's lives, and therefore it needed to be brought up. Now, in their instance, it was prophetically done by inspiration. The reign of Claudius was plagued with multiple and successive famines throughout the empire, as Suetonius, the Roman biographer, notes. And therefore, during the reign of Claudius, which ranged from 41 AD to 54 AD, various parts of the empire faced this famine. And what you need to realize, it was kind of like the areas that produced food were affected, and therefore all the people that relied on it also were affected at different times. Tacitus also records this, as does Dio Cassius. It was that kind of event that every major historian brought it up. Orosius, who's quoted in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, recorded that Assyria, and you need to recall that Judea was a part of Syria during a portion of this time, they had a famine specifically in 46 and 47 AD. And that timing is important. That is a major famine. Josephus, who is the Jewish historian, described an account in his Antiquities, the Jews in which Helena, who is the queen of Adiabene, and her son Izates sent help to Judea during this time because of the severity of the famine. So you have a small area of the empire noting it, and they had Jewish sympathies, but they said, this area needs help. They knew about it and sent help after the fact. In the church, God told them about it beforehand. But more than that, if the Jews were allowing their land to sit fallow every 7 years, it would have fallen just at the end of the famine, which means they would have had not anything left for the whole next year. They would normally have had something and prepared it. That would have been a dire situation indeed. They were talking about a situation that was in a land of famines, that this one stood out as being tremendous, different. We don't have the benefit of prophecy warning us to prepare for such a cataclysmic event, obviously, but it shows us how we ought to see such things. Real love should evoke real sympathy. That isn't hard today. How would you feel if you were on the coast? That's not hard because most of us know somebody there. Watching them on Facebook report, my friends, when they were evacuating, when they could get back in, what was left when they got back. It shouldn't be hard to identify with them. So how do you feel? Do we just separate ourselves when that's their problem? Or do we say, no, these are people we love, this is our problem? Finally, all of you, be of one mind, having compassion. The Greek word is sympathes. Compassion for one another, love as brothers, be tenderhearted, be courteous. Genuine love should produce mercy and care. As a matter of fact, when you look in Luke chapter 10, verses 29 through 37, as Jesus is talking about the Good Samaritan, and remember the last line, the one that the man recognized, who was the brother who showed love and recognized his neighbor, the one who showed mercy on him, he wouldn't name him, but he knew and recognized the behavior. Showing mercy was saying, here is someone in need, and that's love in action. That there is someone who is in a circumstance they did not create for themselves even. There's nothing they could do. There's just need there. For someone who truly loves, mercy and care ought to rise to the surface immediately. There's a need, what can be done? We ought to identify with those affected. If you've ever been affected in some way by some kind of major event, we have people who have been affected by tornadoes before, fires. We need to identify and link ourselves with them so that we feel our fellowship. Don't just think it, feel it. Because that will provoke real empathy. Paul said in Philippians chapter 1, verse 7, and this is a different kind of circumstance, but he says, I have you in my heart. That is, what is going on with you, I hold deep inside. That's empathy. Your situation, I feel. I understand. To some extent, I've been there. So any situation, no matter how small, ought to do this if we're a loving people. Any situation. That is the predicament of the people. The predicament alone ought to move us to compassion. Matthew chapter 14, verse 14, Jesus looks out over people who haven't eaten. They've stayed with him. They've stayed with him, preferring to listen to him than to eat for 3 days. And he was moved with compassion. It's a Christ-like characteristic. The proximity of the problem. This is not very far from us, what we're seeing now. There are people further away who care. It ought to help us also feel close to the people and feel compelled to be part of the solution. Acts chapter 7, verse 24. Oh, to realize that there is a need there, and it's close. How far do we have to get that all of a sudden this becomes my problem? But there's a third thing we need to think about, and that's our preference. Our preference of the church and our brethren ought to be where we start. There will be other things, and it's fine to help out. I hope you're helping out other people. But we're going to start with our brethren. Romans chapter 12, verse 10, be kind. He says he's looking at how we ought to treat one another. And he says, in honor, preferring one another. Galatians chapter 6, verse 10, which is talking generally about this, he says, as ye therefore have opportunity, let us do good unto all men, but especially those of the household of faith. Now let's explain what that means in this situation. It means we go down to try to help our brethren rebuild. Sometimes buildings, sometimes homes. But if we have something and we're taking it to them and there's someone else that has a dire circumstance and it doesn't matter who they are, we handle something. We've got to get to the point of where in all things, big or small, real love and real fellowship beget real empathy. Second of all, real love and real fellowship produce enduring determination. Notice what he says in verse 29 in the response. Then the disciples, each according to his ability, determined to send relief to the brethren dwelling in Judea. Determination. Most of all, we have to see from this what they did, and that is there must be a response. There must be. In 2 Corinthians chapter 8, and we'll be looking at this passage because this passage was part of this event. The Apostle Paul, when he was writing to the Corinthians, was talking about them getting ready to help with this particular problem. So these are linked passages. And he says in verses 3 and 4 in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, for I bear witness that according to their ability, yes, and beyond their ability, they were freely willing, imploring us with much urgency that we would receive the gift and the fellowship of the ministering to the saints. We have people that wanted to give so much that they were basically giving and pushing the money over to Paul and saying, please take it. They need it more than we do, and they didn't have much. And yet, how often do we limit our response to a few expressions of care to people that we know, a few likes on Facebook to what others are doing, and a few dollars designed to just help us not feel guilty? We're better than that. We're better than that. Our response should proclaim the heart of Jesus, the heart of Christianity. The foundation for our response should be rooted in who we are. You noted here in the text, disciples. We're disciples, and that ought to determine how we respond. In 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and verse 16, but thanks be to God who puts the same earnest care for you into the heart of Titus. That kind of care. I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live, yet not I, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. This is who we are. And therefore, that's how we respond. The measure of our response should be determined, notice, by what we have. Our ability determines the extent of our responsibility. Again, returning to 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and verse 12. For if there is first a willing mind, it is accepted according to what one has, and not according to what he does not have. And therefore, it's never about trying to make people feel guilty who just don't have it to give, but to consider what you do have. And that this is the foundation for how we should consider what we ought to do in response. When he looked, they determined it was each according to his ability. Not everyone here can give the same. Not everyone can do the same. We understand that. But you can do something. The mindset of our response should then be governed by the ethics of why we should act, and then combine that with a determination to make it happen. Notice how he says this they did it each according to his ability, and they determined. They made a decision. Something must be done. How? Well, in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 8 and 9, it says, I speak not by commandment, but I'm testing the sincerity of your love by the diligence of others. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, that you, through his poverty, might become rich. The background for how we should think, the ethics of how we think about sacrifice and giving, is what Jesus did for us. And the purpose of our response should be to supply what is needed. Notice, to send relief to the brethren. Dwelling in Judea. Why? There's where the problem is going to be. We go back to chapter 8 of 2 Corinthians and look at verses 13 and 14. For I do not mean that others should be eased and you burdened, but by an equality, that now at this time your abundance may supply their lack, that their abundance also may supply your lack, that there may be equality. As it is written, he who gathered much had nothing left over, and he who gathered little had no lack. Now all that is really saying is, at different times and in different places, different people are going to need help, and different people are going to be in a position to provide the help. Therefore, if we are in a position now to provide the help, don't feel like you're being pushed upon, because there will likely be a time in which you'll be the person that needs it. And to understand the appreciation that's there when it's provided. It links you. When you see that you're giving, and we ought to do this every Sunday, brethren, but when you understand that I'm giving for people, for brethren, for genuine need that does something to help, that's how we ought to see everything we do. Maybe it's easier to see it when you can see pictures of flooding all over the place and see pictures of an entire area that's just wiped clean by high wind. Maybe that's easier to see than the spiritual times you give, because the spiritual needs are just like that. It's just as devastating, just harder to see. You can't take a picture of. But our purpose in giving needs to be that personal. And I encourage you to think about it in that personal way. But the focus we're having, where we should begin, not end, is simple. We begin with brethren. 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 24. Therefore show to them and before the churches the proof of your love and of our boasting on your behalf. That is, this is a way and why we begin there. And by the way, what we'll do there is give to their help. And if they see then that they've got extra that we've given that can go and help people in the community, then good. But we begin with brethren to show we care about you. And that'll be real for them because they see it. They're putting together everything they see around them in water still receding, in homes that are destroyed, and then they see goods given to meet immediate needs. And they see a check come in that says, you rebuild, you help people. It's immediately translated in the mind to being, thank you. We're so blessed today that we can communicate with and know so many brethren who are already working on the Gulf Coast, already aiding others, already cleaning up and preparing to rebuild. We should be part of that. Thirdly, verse 30. Real love and real fellowship demand meaningful action. This they also did. That's a small word, but it's an important word. This they also did and sent it to the elders by the hands of Barnabas and Saul. They said, we need to help, and they did help. Brethren, we should not just do something. We should do something that makes a difference. In 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 6 and 7. But this I say, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. So let each one give as he purposes in his heart, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loves a cheerful giver. It is easy to promise. It's easy to write a check. But we also need to make sure we're willing to do what will help most. One of the easiest examples right now is everybody wants to give clothes, and my friends, they don't need clothes. We want to give something that kind of is extra around. We can move out, we'll never miss it, but they don't need it. The first thing is, what do they need? Not what do I want to give. The nature of real love and real fellowship. We must therefore see ourselves as taking meaningful action in doing so. To plant the seed of Christian love in the hearts of others. And it does not matter. We're trying to do that by people who receive it who are not Christians. We want to plant the seed of Christian love in our brethren so that they see our love. And we can be bound together by it. But do it. Notice in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 12 through 14, on the impact this can have on us. For the administration of this service not only supplies the needs of the saints, but also is abounding through many thanksgivings to God, while through the proof of this ministry they glorify God for the obedience of your confession to the gospel of Christ, and for your liberal sharing with them and all men, and by their prayer for you, who long for you because of the exceeding grace of God in you. I want you to think about what it means to give, and then all it takes is people saying thank you, and saying we've been offering prayers of thanks to God, and you're part of that. You're part of the reason that God's being glorified. Part of the reason that prayers of thanks can go up. We should want people to see our care for others, that we care about others, and plant that seed. We should be wanting people to see our love for one another, our brethren, visibly. We should want people to see the meaning of the gospel as it's fully lived out in our lives. That we are one, we are our own community that are bound together by fellowship and real love. And that through this they also see aspects of the purpose of the church is to live and be together and to be bound together because we're bound to God. We must commit ourselves to meaningful follow-through, though, as well, to address the ongoing need, not just the immediate emergency. You see the news reports and all of a sudden there's care there. I'm telling you, there's going to be needs down the road that are just as important. In 2 Corinthians chapter 8, we return to verses 10 and 11. And in this I give advice, it is to your advantage not only to be doing what you began and were desiring to do a year ago, but now you also must complete the doing of it, that as there was a readiness to desire it, so there also may be a completion of what you have. Do not let how you feel at the moment when you see pictures and you're aware of the problem going on, don't let that go away when you hear there's still a need later on. But you remember and keep your heart open. We need to feel the need. Feel it. We need to promise to help. We need to make it happen. And here's the next part. Look for more to do. It may be somewhere else. It may be around here. It may be in a different area. It may be the next time. But the key is to have learned enough so that our hearts are there, our love is there, our fellowship is there, and that this doesn't go away after the need does. We must make this a meaningful mission. The word, when it says in our text in Acts 11, that they sent it to the elders by the hands of Barnabas and Saul, the word means you're sent on a mission. It's the same word, it's the root for the word apostle. You're sent forward on a mission. Something we're willing to do as much as possible to see through to the end. In 2 Corinthians chapter 9 again, we look at verses 8 and 9. And God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that you, always having all sufficiency in all things, may have an abundance for every good work. As is written, He is dispersed abroad, He is given to the poor, His righteousness endures forever. You see, at their time, they were wanting to send the right message. Sent. Find the right people, elders, and use the right resources. In this case, Barnabas and Saul. We cannot possibly do everything that is needed on our own. This is too big. But you see, we don't have to. We just have to do our part. To be part of something that is truly helping people who truly have need. What has happened on the Gulf Coast with Hurricane Harvey is horrific, but it's really not new. I've seen tornadoes destroy entire communities. I've witnessed flooding in Missouri that lasted for months and months. I've known the havoc that fire can wreak on a family. But when the rain goes away, there's a rainbow to remind us of God's promise to us. And for Christians, it is also a call to serve on His behalf. There are millions of people hurting right now. And there's no way that we can come close to helping them all. But we can certainly help. This is not about a tax write-off. This is about being Christians. That's the heart that needs to come with our Christianity. When we listen to the gospel originally in Romans 10, verse 17, it's to reach, remember they were cut to the heart in Acts chapter 2, verse 37. When we trust Jesus, it was based upon the heart He showed in going to the cross and making a sacrifice for us. And it's our trust in Him and belief that so compels us through His love. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 14, to believe on Him. John 8, verse 24. These are the things that cause us to change a selfish way of living, one that's rooted in just whatever I want to do, and say, what does God want me to do in humble repentance? Acts 17, verse 30. And our confession that Jesus is the Son of God, that He's the one who makes salvation possible, is also a call that He's the one who determines how I should act and who I should help and how. Romans chapter 10, 9 and 10. And when He calls on us to become Christians, His disciples, by being immersed in water for the remission of our sins, Acts chapter 2, verse 38. It is to rise to walk in newness of life, Romans chapter 6, verses 3 and 4 says this, and to be faithful unto death, Revelation 2, verse 10. And part of that is having a heart that Jesus had. And therefore acting as you know Jesus would act. If you are subject to the invitation today, won't you please come while we stand and sing?